Hey everyone, my name is Liz. We are on video 4 of my 6-part series on the question, is journalism dying or just transforming? As we talked about in my previous videos, we've been talking about the changing landscape of journalism, specifically how it relates to specific instances of clickbait, where journalists got you into clicking on their title. Could be seen in Gawker or Clickhole, where you see titles that are maybe a little bit misleading and lead to a very shallow story. So there's a whole debate going on with that, and you can check back to my video 3 for more on that. We've also talked about the changing landscape of technology as it relates to journalists with disabilities, and we talked with Melissa, who's a graduate student at the Mankato State University studying speech pathology. So she gave us some really good insight into how to work better with journalists who have disabilities. And my first video talked about the changing face of journalism and the role that journalists play in all of that, especially as it relates to social media and new media culture surrounding that. In this video, we're going to talk about bloggers. Now, as a journalism student, I have been told in many of my classes to broadcast your work and to blog and just continue to write, and that's great. But I've always wondered what the role of bloggers are in this new day and age. So I thought that this video would provide some really good insight into the changing landscape of journalists. So today we're going to talk about journalists and if bloggers who want to be journalists should be protected under the First Amendment law as professional journalists are in the First Amendment. We're also going to be talking about the things that bloggers write, because we know that not all bloggers are hard news writers, but a considerable amount of bloggers tend to write about hard news or things that they're really passionate about. So what that means for professional print publications when you have bloggers that come into the scene and pretty much take the story first and make it newsworthy. And that's another issue too, is when bloggers they broadcast this work first before the major publications do. So it's kind of old news when the New York Times and the Washington Post post a little bit later. So we're going to talk about that and the ways maybe that journalists can counteract that. We're also going to be talking about journalists becoming bloggers and kind of the mesh between blogging and journalism and what that means, and using the social media tools and the technology to fuse those things together.
Are bloggers journalists? I think bloggers are bloggers, and there are good ones and there are lousy ones. You know, Andrew Sullivan is a really good blogger. He has 4 or 5 issues he's passionate about. He has a couple of good webby ideas, like readers sending in pictures out their windows. He's good at it. There are political blogs that are good at it. There are specialty blogs that are good at it. Are there a lot of bloggers who are doing what you and I understand to be the conventional reporting work of a Bob Woodward or a Seymour Hersh or Jane Mayer or whatever? Not a lot, no. That's expensive, consuming, and it's not bloggy. You can't do it 5-6 times a day. On the other hand, Joshua Mika Marshall does a very good job by continually linking to things that he thinks that you should be as obsessed with as he is, and what you're reading with him is a kind of, you're staying with a certain political sensibility. It's interesting. So to me the question is not, are they journalists, not journalists? It's just obviously a new form, a different form, and there are good ones and there are bad ones.
The distinction with the difference to me is who goes out and does original news gathering. And, most bloggers don't. And the thing I would like to call the bloggers on is their claim that by virtue of sitting at home, searching the internet, they are doing meaningful original reporting that it should rank on a level with a reporter who goes on site and talks to people and sees it with his own eyes. And I don't think that's fair. But I don't want to say, no, bloggers are not journalists. Journalism began, arguably, with people very much like bloggers, pamphleteers, and other purveyors of individual opinion. I wouldn't even call them quasi-journalists. I just call them journalists, but I would not call them reporters. They're columnists, basically.
Journalism implies some kind of a standard or a discipline, even if it's a self-discipline, and I find none of that concept in most of the blogs that I read.
What I'm afraid of is that bloggers are going to change what it means to be a journalist, to be an online journalist. Scholars have argued that being a blogger is not the same as being a reporter. A reporter goes out into the field and gets both sides of the story. They fact checked. They check with their editors. So there's a number of steps of processes that bloggers just don't do, especially ones that use it for a more personal touch, and maybe even use personal names, and it's for their personal benefit. I think that the rise of blogging and technology in the new media culture now has really contributed to the way that bloggers have the ability to capture video and to capture photography and use that in their blog posts. They can also use a personal element and a personal touch to it in the way that publishers at the New York Times and the Washington Post are unable to.
I think anyone's a reporter. The beautiful thing about the internet, and for example, the effect it has on the media, is it really levels the playing field. Any kind of big media personality compared to with a blogger in, say, Morocco or Jordan, they're both netizens, and to me, that's kind of a novel thing. I mean, I think anyone's a reporter. Anybody, whether they're citizen journalists, whatever you want to call them, if they're taking information with their mobile phone, they're filming in Syria, or in Bahrain, tear gas or whatever it might be, and they're uploading it to the internet, they're reporting that. We don't want the news told to us. We want to be part of that process. I think news consumers are becoming producers, and it's exciting. I mean, it makes the job for journalists that much harder, because as a journalist now you have so many more sources. I mean, the very notion of breaking news itself is broken, and there's nothing wrong in that. And if people are afraid of that in the business, I really think that just points to arrogance or a fear of not having a job. People who are so quick to dismiss the multiplicity of voices that social media, that the internet, that technology provides us with access, I don't think their heart's in the right place. There can be a symbiotic kind of relationship between citizen journalists, activists, netizens, whatever you want to call them, people on the ground who understand the culture. They can fill that gap that a parachute journalist, someone who comes in only when the story is hot or trending or whatever, can't potentially add to the story. If you're dedicated to really understanding the story and getting to the heart of it, you will find that there's so much value in those conversations and the information and photos and videos that are being shared amongst the people who really care about the story, because after all, that's their life.
Despite these legal ramifications, bloggers became journalists in early January 2014. It was ruled by the Ninth Circuit Court that even though someone might not write for the institutional press, such as the New York Times or the Atlantic, they're entitled to all the protection the Constitution grants journalists, at least when it comes to their First Amendment rights. One of the judges, Judge Andrew Hurwitz, had a quick comment about the advent of the internet in journalistic ability today, and he goes, quote, "A First Amendment distinction between the institutional press and other speakers is unworkable. With the advent of the internet and the decline of print and broadcast media, the line between the media and others who wish to comment on political and social issues becomes far more blurred." Ellen Angelotti, who teaches about social media, digital trends, and media law at the Poynter Institute, which is a school for journalism and democracy in St. Petersburg, Florida, argues that you don't need to buy ink and by the barrel to be considered a publisher anymore. Everybody can be a journalist, whether it's good or bad. A journalist can possess a hunger to pursue the truth and to share it in compelling ways. But even some of the best bloggers don't have formal education that gives them a degree in journalism. However, blogs compete with mainstream media every day, she argues. In some cases, they have become more trustworthy as sources of information than some old school practitioners. So she argues that instead of focusing on who is doing the publishing, it is more important than ever to look at how they are doing it. The quality of the story and the integrity of the method of reporting should count, she says. By that standard, some bloggers would qualify as journalists while some deadwood reporters at newspapers would fail. Therefore, Ellen is pretty much saying that the First Amendment right isn't just for journalists. It affords all of the Americans the right to freedom of speech. And even in the rise of technology today, we should celebrate how technology lets us express more speech than ever before. And there shouldn't be this discrimination against non-journalists.